Everybody craves significance, and everybody wants their 80 years on Earth to be the most important 80 years in Earth's 4.5 billion year history. You know, the
Right.
sky is falling, or the end is coming, or whatever. Because it's like all of this history was just this big stupid pyramid just for the significance of my life.
Hmm.
And one of the things you learn going around the world is that is not true. And
Dystopia tonight. Dystopia tonight.
gentlemen,
Hello.
good. What is it? Giant John and no, we'll go with Little John and Giant Tom. How about that? Little
There
John
you
and
go.
Giant Tom.
Yes. We're working on a Robin Hood remake as we speak. It's
Good to be joining you both.
good to have you here, man. I'm so excited. I wore my NASA tee, which thank you for complimenting, by the way, because I never know how hard to go. You know what I mean? But like, I had to wear it.
If I'd had a Dystopia T-shirt, I would have had it on, but I didn't have one on top.
We will send you one. We have
Yep.
Dystopia t-shirts. We will send you one. He's like, please don't. He's like, I want to keep some modicum of respect for myself. But that, dude, I'm so excited to have you on, man. I mean, I'm such a huge space nerd. A bunch of my friends are. I love that kind of stuff. Were you like that growing up the whole way through? Did you have another passion that you were interested in, and then you fell into this? What was the trajectory?
I thought it was the coolest thing going on. You know,
Yeah.
to have people climbing into rocket ships, going to a place that isn't like an airport or a seaport, but going to a spaceport
Yeah.
and getting into a rocket ship and leaving the Earth and orbiting the planet, and some people even going as far as the moon. To me, I just thought, man, of all the things that I could possibly be when I grow up, that would be the coolest one. And so why don't I try and do that? So I don't know. I was focused. I'm not sure I was a space nerd. I like Star Trek. I read science fiction, but
Right.
I really wanted to do whatever it took to try and fly in space. And I flew 3 different rocket ships and I've done some spacewalks. So yeah, it's amazing what can
That's
happen.
incredible.
Wow.
What was the? Oh,
I
sorry.
was going to say, I was really hoping you were going to say, I always wanted to be an accountant. But
Life takes some funny turns, doesn't it? Tom,
Yeah.
you know? What was that? I mean, when you were, when you were a kid, your teachers, your parents, stuff like that, was there anybody that you confided in? You were like, I'm going to go to space. And they were like, sure you are.
Yeah, I kept it pretty quiet because it was like announcing I was going to be, Superman or something. It was like, especially because, like, I guess you're seeing Colin Mockery later today.
Yeah.
Like him, I'm Canadian, and so Canada, we didn't have astronauts, we didn't have a NASA, we didn't have rocket ships, we had nothing. But I thought, it's all pretty new. The United States didn't have those things not very long ago, and so things are going to change. So what the heck? All I really got to do is start working on myself. But no, I didn't make a big deal of it. I met my wife when we were in high school. We were in a high school play together, and so I let her know pretty early on, and she was like, "Yeah, nice pickup line. Sure, of course you're going to be an astronaut." To me, boasting about things that you might do in the future is kind of a fool's game. It's better just to try and have that as your kind of your goal to help you decide what to do, and then see how life turns out. But along the way, I became an engineer, but then I was a fighter pilot in combat in the Cold War, intercepting Soviet bombers, and then I was a test pilot. I'm Canadian, Royal Canadian Air Force, but I was a test pilot in the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy, testing a lot of different airplanes, not too far from where you are there in New Jersey and New York. In fact, on Long Island and down in Maryland. And so I did all those things on the way to doing what I was dreaming about.
Right, you're like every child's like fantasy superhero role as you progressed to it. Amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, the things that can happen. And I always just like, hey, what should I do next? And someday I'd like to walk on the moon. And if I'm going to walk on the moon, then okay, I need to study some stuff and learn some things and get a degree and got to be a pilot. You fly in space. So I need to learn how to fly. So I got my pilot's license before I had my driver's license, and I just,
Wow.
the beauty of it kind of gave me a recipe for my own life. If this is what I want to do, then how do I put together the ingredients right now?
Yeah.
And so it worked out. And you got to be lucky, of course. 50 years ago never would have happened, or there are lots of countries in the world never would have happened. But my timing was lucky, and my health was good enough. And I spent I've been around the world 2,650 times. It just
Wow.
it amazes me, and yet it's what's happened.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I'm very interested in the overview effect. When you first experienced it, I know you talked about it a little bit too, but just to give everybody like kind of a perspective of what that is.
Well, there was a guy in the 60s, 70s, Frank something, who wrote a book called The Overview Effect. And he'd spoken to a bunch of astronauts, and he'd noticed that a lot of them, our worldview kind of shifts.
Right.
And the first, when I launched out of Florida on my first launch on Space Shuttle Atlantis, and I was on the flight deck, part of the flight crew operating the shuttle, and launched up, and it's an amazing ride. Takes about 8.5 minutes. Then the engine shut off, and you're weightless. And by the time you can unstrap out of your seat and make sure everything's healthy, and you got to get to the window with a camera because we had to take pictures of that big external tank, make sure it had no damage.
Right.
So that gave you a reason to have to get to the window as soon as you get to space, which is what you want to do anyway. And I remember unstrapping out of my seat, retrieving this long lens camera and floating to the window just as we were coming up on Ireland.
Wow.
And I'm trying to do my job, and take pictures of the big external tank in super detail like I've been trained. But we're going 5 miles a second,
Right.
17,500 miles an hour. And I'm looking past the tank, and there's like London, and there's Dublin, and there's Belfast, and there's Paris, and there's The Hague, and there's, you can see all the way up to Stockholm and all the way down past the Alps down to Rome in one glance. And so it's just,
wow.
And that's just the first 3 or 4 minutes. And then I spent almost 6 months total over 3 flights, and it perpetually forever changes your understanding of the world. It puts everything into proportion. It allows you to understand how old the world is and our little tiny part of it. And I think that is maybe as much the overview effect as anything. You come back with a dramatically improved sense of the reality of the world, and how you I mean, if the two of you had just had that experience, it's kind of a personal reaction and choice. How are you going to work that into your life? What am I going to do with this amazing experience? But you'd have to be just kind of a stone to not have it affect you somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel, because this may be naive on my end too, but after reading about that years ago and kind of thinking about it every time anybody goes into space and does that kind of shit, do you ever feel like you wish you could just take some people, like politicians or anybody that's got this really narrow point of view, drag them up to space and be like, look, do you think it would fundamentally change like you said, you have to be a stone, and as we know, some of them are, but do you think that it would have this crazy impact on everybody and maybe how we see everything?
Well, I remember meeting a guy once, and he said to me, I was so glad to finally finish high school, so I didn't have to learn anything anymore.
Wow.
And I thought,
Jesus,
wow, that's an amazing life view.
Right.
But also, I don't think there'd be, if you've closed your mind off that completely, that you now know everything you ever need to know, and you've seen everything you ever need to see, that I think it would be wasted on a person like that. But for most people, it isn't. One of the coolest things is, you steal every second you can at the window, even when you're there for months and months. And there's on the space station, there's this huge bulging window that sticks out. So you can look forwards and look back and look straight down. And right up until a couple hours before I came home from my 3rd flight, I was still in that big cupola window, just trying to soak up the world because it's so beautiful. And I resolved that I would just love to take every single person in the world that I possibly could and get them. Let's just go around the world once. It just takes 92 minutes. In the next hour and a half,
Wow.
I'm going to teach you how to look at our world and actually, see it, not just be entertained by it, but actually see our world and let it soak into you. And the more people that could see that, the better. And a lot of the stuff I've done, during my flights and since then has been an effort to try and share that deeply personal experience as best as I possibly can.
Yeah. Do you have any opinions and feelings? I'm sure you do on basically the way the space travel is kind of heading. I mean, you've got the billionaires that are taking well, first of all, they're calling themselves astronauts, which is hilarious in and of itself. But I guess, are you more like, look, whatever gets people involved, that's a benefit? Or do you feel like this is something that professionals should probably handle more than guys?
Yeah, well, astronauts. I mean, if you go for a ride on Delta Airlines and you sit in the back and you eat your peanuts, or I guess it's not even peanuts now, you eat your pretzels.
Yeah.
And are you an aviator? I guess by definition, you're an aviator.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's maybe not what it meant 100 years ago when it was Amelia Earhart or some sort of aviator like that, but you're an aviator. Okay. And so if someone buys a ride and spends 10 minutes and gets them out of space, I guess legally, sort of, they can call themselves it out. They're not a professional astronaut, they're not a pilot, but anyway, it's just a word. I think, though, a lot of people have missed the point of what's happened here with the recent tourist flights. What it's really showing is just how incredibly good the technology has gotten, how simple and safe the rocket ships are, and how drastically the cost has fallen.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be only an entire nation could afford to fly in space, and now an individual can buy a ticket. And there are thousands of people that have bought tickets. It's still expensive, but aviation was really expensive back in the early 20s. It was only for very wealthy people. So we're in the process of sorting it out. We need better regulation. We need a model that works, but I think it's a natural progression, and it's okay. And I work with SpaceX and I work with Virgin Galactic and try and help them safely doing what they're doing. But the vast majority of space flight, it isn't flying tourists. It's all the other things we use space for, and what I think 70 countries have space agencies, to try and explore and use and understand and go further out. So we get all distracted by a few billionaires, but the rest of it, to me, is the real heart of the business.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've heard you talk about spacewalks and moonwalks and stuff like that before, and actually working towards eventually possibly living on the moon, or maybe building something out there where people can stay. Is that something that you think we're going to see maybe in our lifetimes, or do you think it's way, way down the road? Or
the crews that are going to walk on the moon are already chosen and training right now.
Okay.
In fact, later today, the big new NASA moon rocket, the Space Launch System, Artemis, it's rolling out to the launch pad later today here on St. Patrick's Day. It's going to launch. I don't know, it'll be a little while to get it all checked out and launched it. So yeah, it's real. That's what's happening. And the very first people took an enormous risk back between 69 and 72, and 12 human beings made it safely to the surface and walked on the surface. But that was just sort of like the very first person to the South Pole or something. Just if we take our best technology and take a huge risk and are willing to have some of us die, can we just barely do this thing?
Right.
And that's what we were doing in the 60s and 70s. Now, Bill Shatner, William Shatner, Captain Kirk, actor at 90 years old, can go for a ride and get up to space. So obviously the technology is a lot safer. And that means, with the safety and the cheapness, that means it's much more practical now to actually start going to the moon more regularly and do it for other reasons than just exploration. And, the moon, it's bigger than Africa. It's a huge geology. It has 100 billion gallons of water in the shadowed craters there. And so we're starting to settle the moon. That's going to happen over the next generation. So pretty interesting time in history. And I'm pretty pumped to be part of all that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll be able to go and walk on the moon yourself? Are you eager to get back there and do it? Or are you just happy to help the next generation get up there? Like,
When I was that little kid watching Star Trek, that's what I wanted to do, was go
yeah.
walk on the moon. So given the chance, I would love to go do it. But I've already been in space 3 times, and there's a lot of younger astronauts. So given the chance, sure, but I don't think I will.
Mhm.
Who knows? I may get a chance to fly in space again. But
Nice.
one of my classmates, Mike Lopez Alegria, he's taking 3 paying passengers up to the International Space Station at the end of the month. He's flying the spaceship, but taking
Wow.
care of these 3 people. So, we're at that stage where 3 successful people who've made some money can go to the space station for a week, and pay for it out of their own pocket. So that's an ex-astronaut doing that.
Right.
But to the moon, I'd love to. I just, you only live once, why
Right.
not give yourself all of the skills so your life can be a grand adventure. And if that's what we're going to be doing, I'd love the chance. But I work with the companies that are making it happen. I work with a company called Astrolab. We were out in Death Valley a few weeks ago testing the big rover that they've built, solar powered rover.
Wow.
That sort of becomes the main mobility vehicle on the surface of the moon.
Mhm.
So yeah, I feel like I'm vicariously there anyway.
Yeah.
But if I can physically get there, enough virtual. I want some actual,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would love to get there in person. Sure.
Right. Yeah. You go through some intense training. I know, do that kind of stuff. But I mean, and you guys have to obviously have like amazing amounts of patience when you do that stuff. But you've helped build two space stations. Is there ever a point where maybe when you're out there, you know what I mean? Like when you're actually outside the space station and you're trying to fix something where it's maybe taking a little longer than it should. How do you control being like, yeah, guys, just take your time. I'm only outside the fucking ship, like, whatever you guys need to do, does it ever take over where you're like, I'm out here a little too long?
No, it's the coolest thing ever to be out on a spacewalk because the ship, the space station or the space shuttle, they're right there in your face. You're holding on to that with one hand. You're wearing a jetpack so that if you tumble off out of control, you can activate this jetpack and fly back and grab back on again. But if you look to one side, the world is gigantic and separate from you. It's like this big textured kaleidoscope of color, silent but huge.
Right.
But the reality is you aren't part of Earth anymore. Psychologically, it's just a planet.
Right.
It's like looking at the moon.
Yeah.
It's a planet in the distance. That's not you anymore. And you're out there surrounded by the eternal 3-dimensionality of the universe. That's your new reality. And it's just overwhelmingly gorgeous and thought-provoking. And you're super busy building things and doing what you're outside for. But at one point, and maybe you were going to ask me already, but when you're in the shadow of the Earth, obviously you get sunlight, dark, 46 minutes of light and then 46 minutes of dark, because you go around and around. When we were in the darkness, while I was outside, we went through the aurora, through the northern lights. And they were
Wow.
pouring around the ship and rippling between my legs, and the colors of the aurora, the green and the little bit of red, and there are some other colors in it too that your eyes are good enough to detect as the other gases are fluorescing. I couldn't believe it, like surfing on the aurora. This little Canadian kid got to surf on the aurora, and all of that is happening while you're out on a spacewalk. It's just
Oh my God.
the richest and most informative and most fun experience of my whole life.
Wow.
That's so amazing. I felt like me and my wife got to experience seeing the aurora, and it was life altering. I could not even imagine being in it, like actually being in it. That's so incredible.
Yeah, it's like you're just getting to know the planet with an intimacy that you could never do any other way. Because you're there either south of Australia or across Canada looking at the northern lights, and 45 minutes later you're on the other side of the world.
Wow.
You cross the U.S. from L.A. to Long Island in 9 minutes. You see all of the geology and geography and history and all the people and everything in 9 minutes, and it's hard to even to see that fast. And so to be outside on a spacewalk with nothing between you and the universe but the little bit of plastic of your visor, it's so personal and so magnificent. I'm so lucky to it's maybe the rarest club that exists.
Yeah.
Of human beings
Yeah.
that have done a spacewalk.
When you guys get back on the ship, I mean, I'm sure there isn't a ton of downtime, but when there is downtime, what is the conversation like between it? Is it just constant like, can you believe where we are? I feel like that has to be most of it. Like, guys.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, number one, you're weightless the whole time. So if the
Right.
three of us were having a conversation inside the ship, one of us would be upside down, and you're just floating around. That's really cool and conversation provoking, because if someone says, "Hey, just throw me the salt," and you just float it and goes tumbling through the air, and you grab
Right.
And we actually can't have salt up there because the sprinkles wouldn't fall. So we actually have salt water that we squirt on our food. So you can
Oh,
have
wow.
And for pepper, we put the pepper in like olive oil, so you can just squirt a little bit of peppery oil on your food. But anyway, so the weightlessness is just a constant freedom and joy. And then we're super busy on the space station. We're running, I don't know what the number is right now, like 300 experiments simultaneously. So there's this enormous rhythm of work that is going on. But you're also just a bunch of idiots up there, just a bunch of people,
Yeah.
and you're just the same little kid that you've always been, and so is everybody else from all around the world. 15 different countries that have built the space station together. So all these different ideas and different religions and backgrounds, and so the conversation's all over the place. But most of the time, you're just working on your own. You really only get together maybe for one meal every other day, and otherwise, you're just the ultimate lab technician and lab rat who every second that they can is trying to steal a few minutes at the window just to notice what an incredible experience this is.
It must be such a unifying experience too, because it's so like the Earth, being on the Earth is so divisive still, like, right? So you're separated by nations and politics and everything that could be, and then when you get there, it's everybody's just like you said outside of that.
Yeah, I talked to the space station on the weekend. Actually, one of the guys called me, Tom Marshburn, and he said, it's horrible what's going on in Syria right now and what's going on in Ukraine right now. I mean, it's just wicked, unforgivable, bestial, greedy, small-minded human misbehavior. I mean, it's awful. But the weird thing of being on a spaceship is you go around the whole planet in an hour and a half. So you see these little spots where people are behaving so terribly, but it's put into perspective of where everybody else isn't, where everybody else is just trying to find a little laughter and grace and joy and have make it nice where they are and be good for their kids and stuff like most people are, so that helps. And then you're doing something that rises above the muck. You're exploring the universe. We're trying to understand what dark matter and dark energy are. We're understanding our planet. So there's a huge unifying nature to the quality of the work that you're doing and the purpose of it all. And so talking to Tom up on the space station on the weekend, it's weird when your cell phone rings and it says, space on it, because it's a space station calling. But they're 100% unified and working hard and having dinner. And Tom's about to take over as the commander here in a couple of weeks. There's a Russian rocket with 3 cosmonauts coming up later this week, and then those tourists are coming up at the end of the month, and then there's another crew rotation, and they just couldn't be busier or more productive. And it's just an immensely disappointing distraction to see some of the stupid stuff that's happening down on the surface.
Right.
Yeah.
When you guys are up there and you can see, like, because I know I've seen some incredible pictures that you guys have taken of like storms that you've seen or what's coming ahead of time, and it feels almost like you guys are like getting the information way before everybody else when it comes to stuff like that. Is it weird to do that kind of stuff, to see like things coming ahead of time and not really being able to do or say anything, where you're like, I can't help it, but I can see this crazy storm coming?
Actually, one of the guys, they were coming up across the northern Pacific, and you cross a little bit west of Hawaii, and then you arc up into the bay there south of Alaska as you cross into British Columbia, and he saw a volcano starting to erupt, a big one, and he's looking at it, and he knows that it's sticking stuff high enough up into the air that it's going to disrupt air traffic. The big airliners that are cutting across there. So he actually, as soon as they had a good satellite link, he got on the phone and he talked to the people at the FAA and said,
Wow.
"Hey, I'm on the space station. Just want to let you know there's a volcano starting to erupt, and you know, you need to work it into your flight planning and put out a NOTAM, a notice to airmen, to let people know." So yeah, we often see stuff early on. We can track things. You know, we can see if you're looking for a ship or something around the world, or what's going on with a particular iceberg, or you know what, you know, all of the natural disasters that go on. The crew that was up during 9/11, imagine the type of stuff they were seeing and taking pictures of. And then, of course, with what's going on in Ukraine now. So
Right.
you see the whole world. And then you have to decide, what does this mean to me? And then what is my, you know, my public service? What is my responsibility? As with huge privilege comes huge responsibility. And you know just how privileged you are to be one of the 7 out of the 8 billion of us that's up there right now. And so, yeah, you take it seriously. And if you can be helpful, you know, you do your very best to make sure the right people know what you're seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you first found out that you were going to be working on the space station, and where you were, and like how you know, like who's the first person you call when you find out that that's what's going on?
Well, first you got to get selected as an astronaut, and that's this
Right.
ridiculous long filter with a lot, or funnel with a lot of filters in it. I think when I applied, there were 5,300 people applied for 4 slots.
Wow.
And recent NASA recruitment, I forget, it was like 18,000 people applied for, I don't know, 8 or 10 slots or something. So that's a big funnel and filter. So it all comes down to this one day where they say, "Hey, we're going to call all the finalists. You know, you've gone from 5,000 to 500 to 100 to 50 to 20, and you know, now whatever. We're going to call the finalists tomorrow, starting at 1:00." So we were sitting in our kitchen. I was a test pilot with the Navy in Maryland. We had this big old farmhouse, and my neighbor, who always wanted to be an astronaut, he'd come over just so he could be in the kitchen, you know, to find out the news, good or bad. And when the phone rang, it was almost right at 1:00. So I thought, hey, that's a good sign. They're going to call the people that they want first. So they call, and you know, the president of this I'm Canadian Space Agency says, "Hey, do you still want to be an astronaut?" I said, "Yes, I always have been." And my wife's doing cartwheels around the kitchen, and you know, just super excited because big watershed moment in life, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, I should call my mom and dad. So I called. My mom answered. My dad's not big on talking on the phone, and I said to my mom, "Mom, you can't tell anybody, okay? Don't tell anyone, whatever you do. Don't." And she's like, "Yep, okay, I won't tell anybody." And so I tell her the news, and then I'm talking to my wife, Helena, and she said, "You should call your grandma and grandpa as well." So I call my grandpa, and he says, "Oh yeah, your mom just called. She told me." But she said, "Oh, I didn't think you meant family." Anyway, that was just the beginning, you know. And then you've got 2 years of astronaut sort of apprenticeship when you're not even you'll like this. You're not even an astronaut yet. You're an astronaut candidate, which that gets abbreviated down to ASCAN. So you spent 2 years as an ASCAN, you know, lovely. I used to be one of the best test pilots in the world, and now I'm an ASCAN. And you're responsible for, like, you know, the Christmas skit and stuff like that in the office. But you finish your astronaut candidacy, and hopefully, and we have that because some people fail out, or they find out, hey, this isn't actually what I thought it was going to be, and I don't want to do this. So it's healthy. And then coming out of that, then hopefully you'll get assigned to be part of a crew. And what happens is the chief of the astronaut office, whether it's Peggy Whitson or who's the chief right now? I don't know if it's Chris Cassidy, but anyway, you get this note or email or a phone call saying, "Hey, chief of the office wants to see you." And you're thinking, okay, either I'm getting a medal, or I'm in great trouble, or maybe I'm getting a space flight. And so you go down to the chief's office, and they tell you, "Hey, we've decided to assign you to whatever, STS-74." And it's surreal, right?
Wow.
Because everything up until then has been pretend, simulators, practice, everything in the future. And suddenly the future gets a lot closer, and you can stop paying attention to a lot of other stuff. And now for the next few years, just focus on the things that are important to get this mission right. And that happened to me 3 times where I was an astronaut for 21 years. So like once every 7 years, but where then you're going to dig right in and work and get ready for that flight. It's a magical moment in life. And you know that if I can make this thing work, nothing's ever going to look or feel or be the same.
Yeah. Is the training like prep? Like, I mean, you're obviously like super prepared to be up there, but is there anything that can really prepare you for the real thing? You know, like I'm sure they get as close as possible, but like, how does it hit you when you're finally like, oh yeah, this is not like what I imagined?
We work really hard to have a good simulation. We don't want a shocked astronaut. That's not a good way to be. You want, and so the amount of training would stagger you. You'd like, for example, what if someone gets sick?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I went and qualified at San Jacinto College as an emergency medical technician. And then I worked at Herman Hospital downtown in all of the different wards. And I went down in the basement where they have the where the bodies are. They have a bunch of cadavers down there, and I did all basic work on the cadavers. And then I assisted Red Duke, legendary surgeon. He's the one who declared Kennedy dead. I assisted him in the operating room. And then I was the guy in emergency as everybody came in off the street, and I'm the one who does the quick diagnosis and does all the initial first aid, kind of intubate or whatever, catheterize or whatever you need to do, just in case one of us got sick up on the space station. Wow. We take the training that seriously. So when I got to space, I was worried and nervous that I wouldn't know what I was doing, but I super practiced and understood everything about everything that I could. And when I got the first thing done right, got my helmet away, unstrapped out of my seat, took pictures of the tank, and then I got the second thing done, and then the third thing done. I'm like, hey, I sort of know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And what it felt like after a while, when you're body surfing and you miss a few waves, but then you get it just right, you paddle right, and you're starting to catch that wave, you realize, hey, I'm on the front of this thing. That's how it felt. I felt like I had done enough work in advance that I was catching that wave. And my entire 3 space flight, actually my whole astronaut career, it really felt like because I'd done all the work in advance, I could really be in the moment of what was happening and do what I needed to do. And that, to me, that there's no better feeling in the world.
Wow. Is that like that first moment that you looked out that window? What was it? Like, what was that first impression?
You know what I wanted to do, Tom, was I wanted to grab somebody, and because we were looking at, London. I used to have a little apartment in London, England, when I was a teenager, and I wanted to grab somebody and say, hey, look, London. I used to live in London. That's London. I used to live there, because like that mattered, right?
Yeah.
That's how I felt, was I needed to somehow have a link, a definable, small way to handle the enormity of what I was looking at. Because there was way, way more out there than I could see, that I could rationalize. And the first time around, all you can really see is what you already know, what you expect to see. And then the second time around, I'm going, hey, there's London, and look, you could see where Windsor Castle is. Must be right there, over by the airport. And then the next time around, you're going, well, wait a minute, if that's London, oh, there's the Thames all the way to the estuary. Next time you come around, you're going, wait a minute, there's where the Isle of Wight broke off, and so that must be where Stonehenge is, right there. Wow, and by the 1,000th time around, you're actually truly seeing the world. And what I felt like was the world was saying, hey, you thought your last orbit was cool? Wait till what I'm going to show you this time. And now you know where to look to really see the world. Look back in the sun glint and look at the Terminator, where the edge of night is, that strip between dark and light on the world. And even on my 2,600th orbit, I was just learning so much about the planet, and just in awe of the age and the toughness and the self-healing nature of our planet. It's just, I wish the three of us were, the time we're talking, we could have gone around the world once,
Oh,
and man, amazing.
It would just gobsmack you the whole time. It's amazing.
Yeah. If you're offering, I'd go.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're offering any free rides, but
We're
go
gonna
for
have
it.
to pitch this. We'll have to pitch this as a show.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
afraid you're gonna have to shave, guys, because you got to wear an oxygen mask.
Oh, all right, all right. That's fine by me. Shave the whole thing. It's
Yeah.
good. I'm good to go. It's the only time I would do it. I know I've seen some videos where you guys are kind of like goofing around, sometimes up there, and just for maybe it's for people, back home to kind of see that there's a playful atmosphere. How tempting is it though, when there is like an aurora outside the spacecraft and one of you's like, you know what, we could really screw with people and make that look like an alien, like, you know what I mean, like a shit. Like, do you ever get that kind of impetus to be like, let's send them a weird picture?
Yeah, well, there's a huge public trust, right? And we're not just goofballs up there for our own purposes.
Sure.
Someone's is trusting us. Yeah, I used to be a military fighter pilot. I was a fully armed F-18. Going out to intercept a fully armed Soviet bomber right on the edge of North America as they're practicing cruise missile launches in our countries. And so there's a huge level of responsibility and public trust that comes with being in that role. And, astronauts, if you watch Armageddon or something, all astronauts are one-dimensional idiots, but that's not how it is. And so you understand that it's not just silliness, and you got to have fun, and we play around all the time, and we kid with mission control and such. But when it comes right down to it, it is a deadly dangerous and serious business that we're involved in, and one stupid little mistake will kill everybody. We had a liquid ammonia leak on the outside of the station where we had to do an emergency spacewalk on basically no notice to go out and so we didn't have to abandon the whole spaceship. And the reality of it is it's that's what you're there for. And once in a while, when you're supposed to be asleep, maybe a few of you will stay up late and goof around or make a music video or do something fun. But no, it's a pretty serious working place to be, and that that's the way it ought to be.
I feel like there's so many questions even on the fighter pilot side too, right? Because how cool, and crazy of a job is that?
Right.
It's a great job. You get to fly one of the highest performance machines humanity has ever built. You would love the freedom that comes with being in a single seat top end fighter airplane. You can just go straight up 5 miles, 7 miles, anytime you want. And imagine if right now you could just pull back on the stick and go straight up 7 miles,
right?
Or flying around low level, and typically at 420 knots, so 6 miles a minute or 7 miles a minute, sorry, and where you can imagine the world going by at 7 miles a minute. And you can push up to 549 miles a minute, and where everything's just ripping past you, and you're only 200 feet above the ground. The concentration that goes with that, you're doing it for a really specific purpose. It's fun, but your job is to defend your country and the things that you think are important in the world. So it's a tremendous challenge. It's hugely free in all dimensions. It's got a really necessary purpose in society, and you take it hugely seriously. So yeah, it's a fascinating job. And then moving from that to being a test pilot, where you test all sorts of new stuff, for a guy like me, that was just the perfect stepping stones. And I would be happy if I was still a test pilot. Great job. The only thing that I really wanted to do more than be a high performance test pilot was to go fly in space, and I was lucky enough to do all those things.
Right. Wow. How do you feel about the kind of pathway that we're leading toward, like people flying, because there's all these new machines, I mean, there's flying cars that are kind of coming out, whatever, and I think more pedestrians are leaning towards doing that kind of stuff. Have you seen the drones that they have now, which is basically like a giant circular thing with a pilot in the middle of it?
Yeah, there's all sorts of designs of because if you think about it, I was looking at a video from I think it was 1911, and over half the vehicles were still pulled by horses.
Right.
And the oldest person in the world is 119. So they were born in 1903. So that's their lifetime. One human lifetime. We have gone from essentially all horses in 1903 to a large degree right through to now, where we have electric cars are becoming more and more dominant, but car travel is so great, but it's two dimensional. You can't stack it unless you build an overpass, and that's not much. So trying to make it three dimensional is the right answer if we want to decrease congestion. So you can stack cars vertically, but it's hard to make a vehicle reliable enough, especially if it's unpiloted.
Right.
Some sort of little Uber drone or something.
Sure.
But if it hits a bird, or if it's a day where the snow is falling, or if one of the engines quits, it's really hard to not just fall out of the sky and die. So how do you? It's a good idea, and there'll be some transitional, technologies that'll get us partway there. Elon's digging tunnels under the ground because that's the other way to solve the congestion problem.
Sure.
But we also don't have enough power density right now. With just batteries. For most of the applications, you can't get far enough. In some applications you can, but it's sort of like golf carts. They're okay for certain applications, but obviously, they don't apply everywhere. I think we'll get there. We need big improvements in battery density, the amount of power you can squeeze into a battery, that type of stuff. But I'm all for it.
Yeah.
You just need to look into the future. Inevitably, where will we get to? Right. And then, is this the moment in history where our technology is just getting good enough that maybe we can start doing that thing?
Right.
And for a lot of technologies, as you say, that's where we are right now. And so it's pretty cool. And I think we should be pushing those technologies as hard as we can.
It's awesome because even have you seen the videos of the guys with the jetpack basically thing going from like a smaller ship to like one of the bigger ships? That blows me away that we're even at that point in time. But I don't know. Do you have any opinions on like being recreational as opposed? Because there's going to be people that are going to be like, we're going to use that at spring break, like because obviously somebody,
that's fine. I mean, we are a study in contrasts as human beings. I'm always amazed when I'm riding in a car that has passed all of the safety standards, driving down the highway. And so I'm surrounded by, 17 airbags and this crumple zone. And I'm wearing a seatbelt and a shoulder belt. And who goes by me but a guy on a chopper with no helmet?
Right.
It's like, and for my car has super restrictive rules as to how much noise it can make. And the motorcycle, the more noise is better. And yet somehow we've rationalized that both those things are fine, and I think that's healthy. You don't want everybody, doesn't want to be just cloistered away in the safest set of circumstances, and we're all different. So I think when we start going vertical, there's some people are going to say, no way. I'm going to stick in my, what did Dave Barry call it? Oh, he said, I'm going to be driving my Honda Actuary. That's the car that I like. And then some people are not. And some people are going to want to get in, just a thing that lifts them up and flies them where they want to go. Yeah. Recognizing that it might kill them. But at the same time, hey, we're all going to die. Eventually. And so I want to live in the meanwhile. And then it's just up to all of our regulators to decide, where they can draw the line and still please as many people as possible. So, it's going to be the risk takers that go for those new technologies first, but eventually they'll become mainstream enough. Like aviation 110 years ago was crazy. People died all the time. And now you get on an airliner and it's safer than your drive to the airport was, and everyone just takes it for granted. And that's one human lifetime. We've come that far. And so you need that transitional process,
especially when you're stuck in that loop in the airport when you're trying to leave and you can't get out, and you're like, you know what, I'm either going to run into somebody or I'm moving here. I don't know which one it's going to be. It's the other thing I was going to ask you is like when you were flying planes and stuff like that, and then all that stuff started coming out in the news because we get bored, so we start thinking about aliens and stuff. But when those reports were released of the guys in the planes and stuff like that, seeing this stuff, were you able to kind of go like, oh, I know what they're talking about, and I think I know what they saw, as opposed to what everybody jumped to the conclusion of?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm evidence-based, and I'm a practical, experienced aviator and human being, and so I would like to see actual evidence, not inferred evidence or secondary or tertiary evidence, and a little some sort of reflection in a heads-up display caught by the recorder of some pilot's jet. I mean, I have flown over 100 different types of airplanes and spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours in jets. And I've worked with a huge population of people who have done the same thing through their entire lives: Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, Canadian Air Force, other Air National Guard. Both my brothers are airline pilots. My nephew's an airline pilot. My dad's an airline pilot.
Wow.
I've been on board 3 different spaceships and 2 space stations and spent half a year in orbit. And I've taken 45,000 pictures of the world. And I have flown with and know basically all the cosmonauts and astronauts that exist. I was president of our professional society, so I know the from Valentina Tereshkova on, I know everybody, and nobody has ever seen anything that falls into the category of alien. None of us. Nobody.
Right.
So then when people say, "Hey, I saw this video on the internet of a pilot's heads-up display, and I don't know what that thing is, so therefore it's got to be intelligent life from another solar system." I'm like, well, that seems like a bit of a jump,
Yeah.
And how about some real evidence? And there's all kinds of stuff that cause displays to behave in a way that seems non-intuitive.
Right.
I'm pretty confident there's life somewhere else in the universe. Be kind of arrogant to think we're it when there's essentially an unlimited number of planets. Our good telescopes, like James Webb Telescope, is about to show us planets around other stars. We've already detected, 5,000. We now know that every star has at least one planet, essentially. We didn't know that 15 years ago.
Right.
So now we can, there's like such a big number of planets out there that it's essentially infinite. So life developed here. We know that for sure. So there's probably at least blue-green algae somewhere else. So we haven't found any evidence yet, but just statistically, it makes sense. But I think it's fun talking about UFOs, and it's exciting. And I like science fiction. And eventually, maybe we'll find evidence. It's why we're drilling into Mars. Why Perseverance and that little helicopter is going to fly again. Why we're drilling into a delta on Mars to see if maybe the fossil of anything would answer that question. If there's fossils on Mars, then the universe is full of life, and that's good to know. Yeah. But I'm anybody can believe whatever they want.
Right.
But belief is easy. You don't actually even need evidence to believe something. I'm more interested in any sort of proof, and I have a pretty wide net. I've never seen any proof.
Yeah. I feel the same way. I would love to see something like that. I'm always interested. Well, like when people have alien stories, I'm like, man, I wish I could have experienced whatever you thought you experienced, but I can't, but there's like, did you see the movie Don't Look Up? Have you seen that yet?
I did not. No.
Oh, you got to see this. It's a great movie, but it's about, basically a comet headed toward Earth. That's like a planet killer. But I read something recently that said, that's not likely to happen, because we kind of know every big object that's
we don't.
But see, that's what I thought too. Yeah, we don't know, right? Because I was what about, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, by the way, but what about Umanuma or whatever the name, I was like, we didn't see that coming.
No, well, that came from outside our solar system. That was, attracted across the space between stars, interstellar space. So that's a rare event. But if you think about it, our solar system was formed from the dust and crap that was in interstellar space. So there's nothing magic about all that. It's just, it's hard to imagine what 5 billion years is. It's such an enormous number. But the Earth gets hit by 40 tons of rock every single day. 40 tons a day. It's our planet. Most of it is just little bits of stuff, dust.
Right.
Sometimes it's a big enough rock that it'll burn up visibly and you'll see a shooting star. But 40 tons a day. And then there are about 200 craters that were big enough and recent enough that you can see them still as scars on the surface of the world. And of course, the whole world was formed by rocks banging into each other, originally. Yeah. So it happens, and it happens on a regular basis. And if you look at, Tunguska back 100 years ago, that big one in Siberia, or on any given day, I mean, there was a person hit by a meteorite within the last year, came through the roof, and he landed on the pillow next to them in bed.
Right.
So it happens, and they're really hard to see. There was one came into the atmosphere last week, and we detected it before it hit the Earth, which has only happened like 5 times. Because if you're looking out at the blackness of space at a lump of coal that doesn't reflect light, how do you even know it's there? You know? And yeah, we track thousands of them, but there are millions of them that we don't track. So, and some of those statistically are big enough to at least do significant damage, if not do, you know, global kind of damage. So it's, you know, if you're an insurance salesman, it's one of the things to buy, let people have a policy on. You know, there's bigger risks, you know, pandemics or car crashes, or even, you know, when is Yosemite going to erupt next time and bury the entire United States in many feet of ash? That's going to happen too. The big caldera there, but probably not, you know, this century, but you know, you don't know for sure. It's just one of the risks of being alive. But NASA and other organizations are doing their best to do a complete sky survey and protect the planet as best as possible, because we know that if we could detect it early enough, we now, for the first time ever in Earth's history, could possibly go out and deflect it. Not like in Armageddon, but that sort of idea. And if you get to it early enough, you only have to change its path a tiny bit so it would miss the Earth. So we actually have the capability to protect our planet if we needed to. So it'd be kind of stupid not to at least figure out how. So, you know, in amongst everything else, one of the things we're working on.
Is space junk that some of you guys are genuinely, I mean, I know I've read again articles about, you know, it being a concern, but there's also like, there's space junk, which is obviously that everybody knows is out there, but now there's companies launching satellites. Is that something you guys have to constantly anticipate and you worry about it?
Well, if you look at things that are the size of your baby fingernail or smaller, there are at least 1 million of those made by people orbiting the world. And a little thing the size of your baby fingernail going 5 miles a second, you know, your energy goes up with your speed squared, you know. So if you double the speed, you get 4 times the energy. If you triple the speed, you get 9 times the energy. Well, in this case, it's going 5 miles a second. So even though it's a little tiny piece of nothing, it's got a lot of bullet-like impact.
Trajectory.
So yeah, we're concerned about it. But space is bigger than most people think. You know, and that sounds trite, but it's hard to imagine the enormity of even all the orbits around the world. And, you know, I lived on 2 space stations, and it has armor on the outside to take care of the little bits of grains of stuff that are hitting it. But eventually a big enough piece will punch a hole in it. So you have to practice, like on a ship, you know, eventually all ships sink, eventually all cars crash. You know, you need to have a plan for when things go wrong. And as you say, we're launching a lot more things into orbit because the cost came way down. So we need a better regulatory model. Cars had been around for a long time before we invented stoplights, you know, because suddenly we were crashing into each other in intersections. Someone said, you know, we should maybe have a plan here, and came up with stoplights. And we need, and lots of people are working on it. You know, the whole space traffic plan. There's a huge meeting just happened in Europe for them to try and be the standard bearer of how to do that. And we need, and the way you regulate it is before you can launch, you have to have an approved life cycle plan for whatever you're launching for. What are you going to do if it malfunctions? How long is it going to be up there? How's it going to avoid hitting anything else? And what are you going to do at the end of its life? You know, and that's where we are now. But we got a big legacy of junk up there. And I'm working with the X Prize on a big sort of competition thing for new technologies, and then there's a bunch of companies working there to try and figure out. And the what used to be Air Force Space Command, now Space Force, they are putting a lot of money into it because they recognize it's a threat to assets up there. It's not an unsolvable problem. It's sort of like, you know, the plastics in the ocean. Stupid thing for us to have done. How do we clean it up? You know, who's going to take responsibility? It's sort of in that category. It's not unsolvable. We just have to decide that's what we want to pay attention to.
Right. Well, that's actually, I mean, I wondered that, because when people, you know, sometimes you read these articles or whatever, and they're like, it's over, you know, we're launching satellites into space, and, you know, there's not going to be enough room. And I'm just kind of like, I don't know. I don't know how anybody actually feels about that.
Everybody craves significance, and everybody wants their 80 years on Earth to be the most important 80 years in Earth's 4.5 billion year history. You know, the
Right.
sky is falling, or the end is coming, or whatever. Because it's like all of this history was just this big stupid pyramid just for the significance of my life.
Mhm.
And one of the things you learn going around the world is that is not true. And so I think a lot of people's reaction to things is just they want to feel significant. They want their time on Earth to really count, and so they look for big issues that seem global, so they can be part of that to really feel like they mean something. And I can understand that. That's a normal human reaction. It's been going
Right.
on for 10,000 years, so that's fine.
Yeah.
The real question is, what are the actual problems? And then what are we doing individually and collectively to try and solve them? Whether it's pandemics or feeding 10 billion people or cleaning up our garbage or cleaning up in the atmosphere or cleaning up space debris. None of those are unsolvable problems, but we just have to prioritize them amongst everything else.
Sure.
Absolutely.
If there was a movie that you would point to and say this is the best representation of space travel, I've heard Interstellar is one of those movies where they get kind of those kind of things right. Is there anything you would recommend?
Apollo 13 is the best because it's based on a real thing,
Sure.
and Ron Howard made that movie with some good actors, and Ron worked super hard to keep it as factual as he could. He used the actual transmissions between Jim Lovell and the crew and Mission Control as the dialogue for Tom Hanks and the other guys, So he it's not, obviously he had to simplify a whole thing into a 2-hour show, which is fine, but it's very good. And then the spin-off series that Tom did From the Earth to the Moon, it came out good.
Right.
Interstellar that's one of a Nobel Prize winning physicist named Kip Thorne, who it was his idea. And then he hired a company in the UK called Double Negative to take his math and what would it look like?
Wow.
What the theory of a black hole. You guys are the best at visualization. What would this theory actually look like? And then how can we build a plot that that puts all that into it? And so it's pretty interesting. It's really way out there because it's beyond a lot of our, and you had to assume some things that don't exist yet. But it's quite interesting and thought provoking. But sometimes you just want entertainment too. In which case, I think Galaxy Quest is the best space movie ever made. I love Galaxy Quest.
Me too. My friends and I talk about that movie constantly. It's just so much fun. Yeah,
it's great.
And just the Star Trek parody. I mean, they could not have nailed that more perfectly.
Yeah, it's the best Star Trek movie ever made.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah. If somebody came to you like tomorrow and was like, hey, listen, we jumped ahead technology wise. We want you to fly to Mars. Would you do it? Or would you be like, no dice?
Well, the details matter. Fundamentally, yes. Yeah, I'd love to. Sure.
Yeah.
But what in and for what purpose? Those are the two big questions that a test pilot asks, or that an astronaut asks. I think a lot of people just don't know what astronauts do. We think we're like airline passengers. We're sitting in some waiting room and going into public relation events, and then hey, your rocket's going in 10 minutes. Go get in. We help invent space flight. I helped design the space shuttle cockpit. Every flight we had to invent it. For my second space flight, I went to the full scale model makers so they could build the simulations that we could put underwater, so that then I could train for 3 years so that it would be realistic enough so that when we got to orbit, we would have been trained well enough to deal with all of the problems. Astronauts help invent space flight. So if you say, hey, you want to go to Mars? I'm going, yeah, but what in? And what level of maturity is it at? And what are the risks, and how are we designing and inventing and testing things to make them work? And then what's the purpose of it? Why are we going? I'm not going to spend a huge amount of taxpayer money, just for bragging rights or something. What is the purpose of this? And does it make sense to me, intrinsically? And right now, it doesn't make sense with our level of technology. It doesn't make sense to go to Mars. We're going to kill everybody every time. or maybe we'd get lucky and maybe get some people there, but for what end,
Yeah.
until our engines get better. And maybe Elon's on the right track with the vehicles that he's building. But to me, his are far more suited to going to the moon and back than they are going. But Elon's a brilliant, a very remarkable human being. Lots of
Right.
flaws, but some tremendous strengths. Amazing guy. But I'm not sure, but you need a long-term vision. You got to inspire people. You don't just want to be a package delivery company to low Earth orbit. It's necessary, but it's boring.
Right.
You want to inspire people to huge projects, and so getting to Mars is really inspirational and complex. And we should get all our eggs out of one basket. Just look at the Earth's history. But I would love to. Yeah. But I would, more than that, I would love to work for the next 10 years to be part of the team that invented all this stuff and solved all these problems in a way no one had ever come up with before, so that we could push everything and just barely do something super hard for the very first time. That interests me. Not just, hey, go to Mars and back.
Go to Mars.
Because that's not going to happen.
It's a good way of putting it, because people do kind of talk. I think because of Elon, people kind of talk about it very flip, where they're like, yeah, we're all going to get on a ship one day and just go, and who's signing up? And, and you're like, you're going to die, right? It's a one-way trip. But I want to talk to you about your books that you have. You have 3 bestsellers. You have The Apollo Murders, which is on the screen. And it's being made into a series, you were telling me earlier before. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Small correction, 4 bestsellers.
4? Oh my God! Sorry about that.
The books have done great in many languages and all sorts of awards and things. But the ones beside me here, The Apollo Murders, it's my first thriller fiction, and it's done fabulously well. Big article in New York Times and a bestseller in multiple countries. It's already in, 15 languages, I think, all around the world. And the cool news is, as you mentioned, we're just signing right now with a production house to make it into an 8-part series on, Apple or something like that. So that's still, there's a lot of bridges to cross from signing the original contract to still getting everything done. And it's a low hit rate, but it's a lot further along than I've ever been. And so that's fun and exciting, that me sitting in this room here, actually at this desk, for a year, just writing this book, coming up with all these ideas, this amazing sequence of cool thriller action, alternative history fiction, that already millions of people are sharing it and sending me notes every day. And maybe fairly soon, people be able to really live it and go see it. And hopefully it will be, when someone says to some future astronaut, so what's the best series ever? They could point to The Apollo Murders. Hopefully that's being the most realistic and interesting series. But and I'm writing the next book in the series now. I've done a bunch of stuff in my life, but what really matters, I think, same question for you two guys, is what do you do with everything you've learned so far? What do you do with all the experience that you've had? Some of it you just keep to yourself. Some you tell your family. Some you try and apply to your work. What do you do with who you are and what you know? And I've always asked myself that question. And I work with a lot of space companies, and I teach at university, and I run a big technology incubator called Creative Destruction Lab. And but I thought it would be fun to try and tell the story of spaceflight as a thriller fiction, so you could really let people in on how everybody actually is, not just some sort of sanitized NASA version of what happens, but actually, everyone, farts and throws up and swears and does stupid stuff and has their own agenda, just people. And and so that's why I wrote The Apollo Murders. And I'm just delighted that the book's been a huge success, but also that now maybe we can bring it to the screen as well. What a fun adventure.
Yeah. How involved are you in the process of bringing it to the screen? Do you have like, full creative control over it? And is it verbatim book to screen, or are you getting adjusting?
Yeah, well, I did not want to have my name on a series that sucked, or that I was embarrassed about. Worse, I don't want to cringe in the theater. Like when I went in and watched Gravity, it was at the Canadian premiere, and the director and some of the actors and stuff were there. And it made me cringe because the visuals were good, but there was so much of it that was just wrong. And I thought Sandra Bullock, I mean, she's a really a huge respect for her and good actress, but the part they wrote for her belittled women terribly. I mean,
Yeah.
George Clooney had to keep coming in as, I'm competent, you're an idiot, let me save you again.
Right.
And the most experienced astronaut in American history is Peggy Whitson, a woman. You know, she's done 10 spacewalks and commanded the space station twice and NASA's chief astronaut. And yet here they've written this thing. So if you're a little girl and you're watching Gravity, you're going, oh, women are incompetent and maybe they can find a way to survive. But the men are the only ones who really know what's going on. Really? That's the movie you wanted to make?
Yeah.
Anyway, so when we make the Apollo murders into a series, I don't want it to make me cringe in the audience. I want to, have it as close to reality as we possibly can and still make it a thrilling and effective story. And so I'm in an executive producer role where I'm involved in the writing. I'm not a screenwriter. I'm not, the writer, but definitely in the contracting, I want to be, and they want me because they need someone who can answer the realism questions. And since I've done a lot of those things and I wrote the book, I'm in a good position to do that. I'll be involved, and I really like the team of folks they're putting together. It's with Altitude, and they're a UK-US firm, and they've done some really good stuff. And so, it's there's never any guarantees in life, but I'm really excited about this project and where we are with it.
That's cool. I'm glad to hear that you're involved in it because there's so many authors I've loved over the years too who've had a project kind of taken away. They get to TV and then they find out that they're hardly involved, and it's like, you have to learn to let it go. And you're like, it was so good. That's so. I want to thank you so much for coming on. By the way, we're getting close to wrapping, but we just want to get to some questions that some people had from the audience. If I can toss those at you,
I'm ready.
Okay. One of them is, I think we already kind of touched on it a little bit. One is from Josh, and it is so if you were to meet an alien, if you were to meet some kind of space thing when you were out there, is there a protocol? Is there something like, hey, if you're up there and you do come in contact, what's the first step?
Yeah, no, there is no protocol. It's not like, when you're an astronaut, what you do is you take what is the most likely thing to kill me right now. And that's the thing. That's protocol item number one. Okay. And then what's the next most likely thing? And then what are we trying to accomplish? Which experiments are we trying to run? And your whole life is the thousands of prioritized things that are there for significance or probability of happening. And that's what you focus your whole life on. And so aliens knocking on the outside of the hatch, that's an extremely low probability event. So we don't spend any time worrying about it.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of stuff in that category. What do you do if there's a dinosaur on board? Well, I don't know. I guess we'd figure out something, but it's probably not going to happen. So let's not waste any brain cells on it. So no, Josh, I'm sorry, but it is an incredible enough thing to happen that we don't worry about it.
I love the imagery of a dinosaur on board. Now I'm not going to be able to get that out of my head.
I almost feel like if an alien life form would hit and it almost looked exactly the same, both of you would just be like, I don't know, this is it. Like, this is it.
You want to come in?
I mean, obviously we're smart, educated, experienced people, and we know what's going on. And, we try and do what made sense, but no, it's too low probability to worry about having to have a set of procedures or something.
Yeah. Do you subscribe to the theory, basically? Because I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about it a lot, where we're probably ridiculously insignificant. If there's somebody that can travel through space, he's not going to pay attention to us. But I feel like sometimes I'm like ego, where I'm just like, we watch some pretty cool stuff on Netflix. I don't know.
Well, one of the things I thought about, John, going around the world all those times was how old our planet is. It's 4.5 billion years old. And you can see, because you're going so fast, you can see where South America and Africa used to fit together,
Wow.
So you can get a real sense of time, which is hard to get, on Long Island or in New Jersey. You don't get a sense of the incredible age of the world. And also, while I was on the spaceship for my third flight, we went halfway around the world. So that means half a year, right? Which means you go halfway around the sun. And so that meant winter and summer swapped ends on the world. So it was like watching the world take one breath out of 4.5 billion breaths. Right. And so I started to get an intuitive sense of just how old the world was, which is hard to grasp, but also that life has been on this planet for 4 billion of those 4.5 billion years without interruption. We have fossil records, in northern Canada and northern Australia. So that was immensely reassuring. That Earth is so tough, and we could not wipe out life on Earth if we tried. We don't have the capability. Life is so tenacious and tough and everywhere, miles underground and in the atmosphere. So that's really reassuring. Quality of life for humans, that's hard to maintain, but life is here to stay. But when you look at that time, the most primitive life, barely, blue-green algae, guck, that is the dominant life form on Earth for almost the whole history. Complicated life is really recent, and sentient, thinking, intelligent, questioning, complicated life, that's super recent. And so when I look out at the stars, I think, well, maybe that's normal in that life is fairly common. There's blue-green guck on a lot of planets out there if the temperatures and pressures are okay. But did the right sequence of events happen that caused that stuff to mutate into, stuff with a head at the front and a tail at the back and some sort of eyeball sensors or something? That made an intelligent life. As far as we can tell, we are the first actually really intelligent life after 4.5 billion years. So my guess is life is common and intelligent life is incredibly rare.
Wow.
And if that's the truth, then I think if we found intelligent life anywhere else, even if it were more advanced or less advanced than us, then we wouldn't just ignore it. If we find a fossil on Mars over the next couple of years, we're not going to ignore it. We're going to study the hell out of it. We're going to try and learn every single thing we can from it. And so I think if a species that had been intelligent for 1 million years longer than us came along, they would see us as whatever tadpoles, but they wouldn't ignore us. They would still recognize that we're on the path to what they became. So I don't know. There's no way to know for sure. Maybe Neil's right. I don't know, but I think it is worth thinking about, especially because we're drilling for life on other planets, and the James Webb Telescope that is just going to get its mirrors focused here in the next couple months is going to be seeing pretty detailed information about planets around other stars.
I can't wait for that.
We're getting close to the point where we will have evidence as to whether we're alone or not. And then, what do we do with that information? And how does it fill in our understanding of our place in time and our place in the universe?
Nice.
Do you think it would be, I was going to say, do you think it would be smart of the people that did attain that information to let that information out to the masses right away, or like almost figure out how to dissipate it to the masses? Because I feel like you said earlier, the masses can be a little bit different, where they're like, well, I learned as much as I need to learn in high school. I'm done. Does that guy need to know?
I don't know. I think word's going to get out, and I think that's okay. NASA doesn't keep any secrets, and NASA's, people think it does, but it doesn't. They just tell everybody what they're up to. Right since walking on the moon, they were brought. If Buzz swore, it got broadcast on international TV. It's just the way it was, and I think that's, for an organization like NASA, that makes sense. If there was some huge secret military tactical advantage to something we discovered, then it would probably get treated differently by no matter what country was doing it. But I think if the James Webb Telescope sees an atmosphere around another planet that shows that it's an industrialized planet, like a distinctive signature, then they're going to tell everybody.
Right.
And we'll just have to decide based on whatever our belief system is, or our economic model, or our own view of the universe. We're just going to have to figure out, how does that change our previously slightly incorrect assumptions?
Nice. We have another question from a fan. What inspired you to start writing books in the first place? Were you inspired by a particular author, or something you always wanted to do?
I've always been inspired by authors, and I like English or language in school more than anything. My first book, that's my newest one there. My first book is this one, Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth. as an astronaut, you go out and speak a lot, and I realized after 20 years of going out and talking, people, it's nice to tell people, how do you go to the bathroom in space and what's the food taste like, but what really matters is what's worthwhile out of all this for me as a person. Are there any
Right.
ideas out there that I might be able to incorporate into my own life, And I found after all those years, that was the part of my talk that was the most worthwhile for people. And so I thought I should try and write those down, and so one day when my wife and I was out walking the dogs like we do every day, and I said, I should call this book An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, because that's the only thing that matters to us. And so that's the first book, and it's done great. It's all over the world, and Sam Houston University, just north of Houston, they used it as their first year reader. Compulsive. They built the entire curriculum of the university for first years around the ideas of that book. So part of my motivation, like a lot of stuff I do in my life, the vast majority of my motivation is how do I share the rare experiences that I've been lucky enough to have. It's why I did a master class. It's why I wrote and recorded an album of music while I was on the space station. I teach at university. It kind of informs most of my decision making because I just feel it would be a waste if I squandered this incredibly rare human experience and didn't tell anybody about it, didn't share it, just kept it to myself. It's like, well, okay, you were a good technician, but you kind of missed the point of why we put you there. It wasn't just to throw the right switches in the right sequence. It was actually to bring back the human experience so maybe some other people could have better informed decision-making in their own lives. So that's why I write books. And because it's fun and interesting. And at this stage of life now to write fiction, it's a really fun and interesting challenge as well. And I learned so much when I'm writing fiction. I read a lady the other day, and she said, you sit and you write, and then you fact check, and then you agonize over all your word choices, and then you go back and you re-edit, and then you go to the next sentence. And that's what writing is like, and for me, it's a very painstaking process because I want to get it right. I want to make it as good as I possibly can. And it's fun. It serves a purpose.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I want to ask you the last three questions that we ask every guest. Oh, somebody said, I loved An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth.
I see that. Thanks, Mike.
Oh, here we go. We got
one more.
Oh, things are popping up.
Had you had experience on the Earth that it compares to the feeling of seeing our planet from space? I've imagined at the moment 1,000 times in my head, and I would love to hear about it. Looking out the window. Oh, we talked about that a little bit earlier. But
I think, yes. Any time where you are overcome with awe, where you are awestruck by something that is magnificently bigger and more important and more complex than yourself. And so I feel it when I walk into an enormous ancient cathedral, St. Peter's or St. Paul's, I have to stop what I'm doing just to try and, my tiny little bit of capabilities, try and soak up where I am. Or when I've walked into an ancient wood forest, like a redwood forest, and you're just like, wow, just think of the history and the nature and the reality of where I am and my little busy ant life racing around life. and this is here at the same time. And so anytime, and it doesn't have to be, you can be awestruck by other things, but I find that kind of comes the closest when you feel like you should be talking in hushed tones for whatever reason, when you feel like you want everyone, hey, just be quiet for a minute. I'm trying to soak this up.
Right.
That's, to me, that is the perpetual feeling of being on a spaceship.
Nice.
That's great. How about having children? I know you have children. How about having children? Where did that rank with, like?
Yeah, I was lucky enough, just with circumstance, to be in the delivery room when my wife was giving birth to each of our three children. And that is as big a life event, I think, as you can have. You and your spouse are creating another human life, which is a big responsibility, but also an amazing biological thing to happen. It seems like magic. And there's a wickedness to birth but it's just so physically painful and demanding of the woman. But at the same time, there's such a magic to it. I mean, if David Copperfield were designing, a magic trick, it's like where there was one swollen being, now there are two, and one, and they're both individual and sentient, and that's there's such an awe-inspiring magic of that. So yeah, I count those on that same scale. Absolutely.
Nice. I've got to ask you the last 3 questions that we ask every guest on the show.
Okay.
So first one is, if you can go back in time and talk to your younger self, what piece of advice would you give yourself today that would help you?
For my 3rd space flight, my dad was in his 80s and couldn't travel all the way to Kazakhstan. So he talked to me beforehand, and he said, "You have worked your whole life to be ready for this. Trust yourself. Trust yourself." And I think if I was talking to myself at 17, I would say, "Hey, you're on the right path. It's going to be an enormous amount of work. Things are going to go wrong, but trust yourself." I think that's what I'd say.
Beautiful. Second question is, what had to end in your life, good or bad, that led you to where you are today?
What had to end?
Yeah.
You have to give up on more things than you'll get to do, right? Some of the things that were in your heart of hearts, like, I'm not getting any Olympic gold medals. I'm never flying on the Snowbirds aerobatic team. I'm never, and there's a lot of places. I've been to almost 100 countries, and I've been around the world. Lots of places in the world I'm never going to see. You have to recognize that life is finite. And your ability to experience things is finite. Even if you go crazy and burn the candle at both ends and in the middle, you're still only going to get a tiny taste of all of the possible experiences that might happen in life. So accept that. Accept the finite nature of your own life, and accept that means that some of your dreams, the majority of your dreams, are going to be unfulfilled. So treasure the ones that are happening even more.
Right.
So I think it's not the end of dreams. It's just understanding the necessarily finite nature of all your dreams.
Wow. That's a great answer, man. Thank you. And the third question's super silly, and it ties into the show. So if this is a genuine dystopia, and there were aliens, zombies, whatever your dystopia is, volcanoes, stuff on fire, everybody's last day on Earth, what's the way you would like to go out? What's your epic death look like?
I wouldn't accept that it's guaranteed the last day on Earth. If I'm still healthy and I'm still thinking, then why should it be the last day on Earth? Most things are just problems that need to be solved. And so, that's what I've done for a living my whole life. So I wouldn't just, that's what really pissed me off about Neville Shute's book On the Beach. All these people in Australia that had 5 months to prepare for the nuclear cloud to finally come there, and they did nothing. They just sat around and went, "Oh, well, we're going to die 5 months from now." And so let's just pretend we're not. I mean, like, hey, do you have any idea what you could accomplish in 5 months? And this is the future of our whole species. I was like yelling at this book going, "What are you doing? Don't be so no, but eventually I need to accept the death. I've had lots of my friends die because of the dangerous professions I've had. And I've already accepted the reality of my own death, but that doesn't mean I now give up on life, and faced all sorts of threats, and the real question is, do you have the skills to deal with the problems in order to do the right thing next or not? And so if things are going bad, then work hard to try and make them go good again, or to minimize the impact on me and my family. Try and find a set of circumstances to continue life in as good a capability as possible. And if the whole thing comes apart, then try and, the people that have the longest and greatest chance of life, my granddaughter and my children, try and do everything you can to give them the greatest chance of moving forwards, or whatever time is remaining, pay attention to those things. That's where all my priorities would be.
Beautiful, man. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an honor to talk to you.
Absolutely.
Really nice to talk to both of you, gentlemen. And I hope you do get a chance to fly in space and surf on the Aurora.
man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It really was a pleasure. And everybody go out there and check out The Apollo Murders. You want to see the 4th best-selling book. I apologize. That was my fault. I didn't know this one ranked onto the 4th. So
No,
make sure
it's not the 4th, but it is the 4th one I've written. Yeah. I think it's doing as well or better than some of them. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Thank you for mentioning it.
my pleasure. Have a great one. Thanks again
Take care,
for
man.
hanging out
Peace.
with us.
Thanks, guys. Be well.
You too.
Dystopia tonight.